Okay, so let's listen how Conor McGregor gives us an in-depth look on how he handles a loss.
After the first fight with Nate, you handled yourself like a professional. You received a lot of praise for showing up at the press conference and handling yourself the way that you did. But talk about the few days after that, when things started to sink in, you were away from the media. What was the emotion like for the first couple of days after that loss?
You know, it's something that it's part of the game. You just got to take it. It ain't nice. You know, the highs are very, very high and the lows are low. But you suck it up, break it down into what went wrong and correct the mistakes.
Let's go over what he just said. He said the first thing is that he had to suck it up. So in other words, there was some conflict. In other words, it hurt him to take that loss. So he had to then detach from it emotionally to move on to the next step, which was to look at it and to learn from it. And then he was able to move on. Let's continue.
This is the game we are in. It's a crazy business. Nobody makes it out of this game unscathed. All you got to do is look through the history books. So I look back at the contest and I enjoyed the contest, and that's it. I made my plans for revenge, and that's it.
We've heard a lot about the changes in your training camp and the way you're approaching it differently this time. Can you talk about how that was developed, the decisions that were made? Were these decisions you made, your coaches made? How was it developed?
Okay, listen carefully now, because he's going to talk about after he went through the adaptation of the loss. In other words, sucking it up, emotionally detaching from it, looking at it, then learning from it. He's going to now talk about the adjustments that they're starting to make.
You know, nobody can compare to my rise and how this is all shaped about. Myself, my coach, my team, everyone involved in this, our life has changed so quick. So we were forced to kind of look at how we were preparing for these contests. You know, it got complex.
Notice that he said that they were forced. In other words, this wouldn't have happened necessarily. This process of looking and learning, they wouldn't have necessarily been looking to change or adapt their process unless it was through this loss. Very interesting.
Listen, we'll show up anytime. We'll train whatever we feel like. We'll hit them and they fall.
Basically, he was just talking about the structure of his training was basically one of non-structure. They went in, trained what they felt. In other words, there was no order to the way that they did their training. There was no real system that he was talking about them following in their training. There was no real schedule. They were just doing things kind of ad hoc, and he still got to where he got to be. But he says that was kind of the downfall or the reason why he had this loss. Let's continue.
And on top of that, everyone has their own commitments. Everyone has, you know, the amount of stuff I have. My coach has like book out now, and you know, everyone that has been involved in my camp have had a crazy change in their entire life. So this one, it forced us to look at how we were preparing.
Notice he said force them.
It forced us to come back together, and do what we've been doing from the beginning. You know, focus, solid work. This time we incorporated structure into the game. I feel structure is the true key to success. You can get.
Notice how he's talking about structure. Very interesting. Now, if he's saying that structure is the key to true success, meaning that before this time, they weren't really structured. So there's something to having a structured training environment, structured curriculum in your skills, structured strength and conditioning program, structured active rest and recovery program, and then how those things all harmonize together is the structure that he's talking about. And it's so key. Just pause to think for a moment. Structure produces productivity. In other words, when you have things in order, those things in order create productivity. Now, doing things randomly creates creativity. Okay, so what he's saying is that before this time, they were kind of training randomly, and that kept them fresh and stuff. But eventually, it kind of turned stale, which they didn't realize. Now, if you turn that on its head, 80% of your training schedule should be structured. The other 20% of the time should be non-structured. Why? 80% of the time that's structured will bring you the gains from those training sessions. The 20% of the time will allow you to become creative and see different things in the things that you've been training, or see the gains. That's when doing things randomly. Again, active rest means swimming, doing things different from your normal training routine. It freshens you up. So utilizing non-structure is a vehicle to get energy to go back into the grind of that 80% of training structure. You can apply this almost in everything in life as well. Okay, let's continue.
You can get a reasonable amount of success by just winging it and just going as you feel. But I feel to reach the true heights, with to reach the billions, the amount of stuff that comes along with this life, you've got to have a structured life. You've got to live a life of structure, and you can't stray from that. And that's what we've done. We've set training times, we've set schedules, and we've stuck to it. And I've responded really well. Another thing that we used to never do was rest. Was never really, it was, we just train until it was fight time.
Notice that he's really making an emphasis now on rest. So in other words, now they have seen that the rest time is the time where you can be more random in your training. You could do different things, but the 80%, that structured time, that's when you're going to make your gains from fight to fight, or from scenario to scenario. One other thing, as a JKD man, I always kind of go back to Bruce Lee and I think about what he says. And he always talked about you have to be able to understand rhythm in order to break rhythm. In other words, you need to be able to have structure in order to understand unstructured's place within your overall structure. So in other words, a lot of us like to just kind of do things ad hoc and not really put ourselves into a certain routine. But if you create a certain routine with a little bit of flexibility at a certain time to be able to go off that routine, it's going to sustain you, especially in, like, for example, the injury department, not to mention just the mental freshness going into each training cycle. Let's go on.
This time we had our set days and we had our rest days. So I knew what days my rest were, and the days prior to that I would work hard in anticipation for this rest day. And when that rest day came, I would take my rest, and I would not have this anxiety feeling where I must train again, because that's what happens to a lot of people.
Notice that he's talking about the anxiety that you feel, and the reason why that he's saying that he fell prey to this is because up until this point there was no structure. So in other words, if you don't know that, okay, I'm starting this week, I got 3 days to train hard and then I got 2 days of rest or 1 day of rest, then you're going to always feel like you're not training enough. Okay, that's why he's saying this, is because he's already experienced this during this loss. Is that if that structure is there and you understand I got 2 hard days or 3 hard days in this week for the next 3 days, and then I get a day off, it gives you a lot of like motivation to go through that grind to get to that one rest day. And then that rest day, you could put your full engagement into it because it feels like you're doing something totally different. Keeping it fresh.
They train out of anxiety, and it's like I'd be sitting there at 11 o'clock at night and be like, and I've just done 100 rounds this week, and it's Sunday and I'm supposed to take a day off, and I'm like twitching saying, fuck it, I'm going to go do another session and then I'll go work. So everything was structured. I take my rest. I work when I work. The session starts and ends. That's another thing that we drifted off. The session never really started or ended. Sometimes I'd be in the gym for like 8 to 10 hours a day.
He's talking there about volume, guys. Notice what he said. 8 to 10 hours a day just training, an hour here, couple hour break, hour here, couple hour break, hour here. So just kind of training throughout the day ad hoc at any time. And what that does is it increases the overall volume of training, which again becomes more of a grind. The more volume that you add, the more volume of work that you have to do at work, the harder it's going to be for you to handle. So if you really think about it, you want to train in the gym like you do for your event. Okay, if your event is a 15 or a 30-minute event, well then anything beyond 1 hour in the gym is going to be wasted. Okay, and then what the intensity that you apply within that hour, that equals high level training. All right, let's go on.
Just rolling through, not really anything specific. And for the fight game, that's not the correct approach.
Notice that he said not really doing anything specific. So in other words, there really wasn't specific aspects of the game that they've analyzed, looking at their strengths and weaknesses and developing those parts of the game. They would just come in for the whole day of training, get there in the morning and just kind of do whatever they felt like. Okay, that is unstructured, and it leads to overtraining, it leads to lack of motivation, and it leads to kind of a complacentment, when you can really ultimately use that 80-20 principle that I'm talking about to continually keep things fresh.
It's a 5-minute round with a 1-minute rest. You need to be prepared for that. That's what the contest is. You need to be able to go from 0 to 100, rest and go again, rather than a continuous training cycle where you're in the gym half training for many hours a day. That's not beneficial to what we are doing in the fight. So these are just changes that we've implemented, and again, I've responded amazingly. Usually at the end of camp I'm like, I can't wait for this camp to end, or I'm sick of training, or I'm banged up. I am absolutely perfect. Like this.
Notice the things that he mentioned, that he's sick of training or he's banged up. So in other words, a 80% structured, 20% non-structured training, perpetual training cycle when you're outside of camps is an awesome way to keep yourself fresh in the mind, fresh in the body.
Last camp I remember I was in a bad way. Everything was just, the opponent changed, the whole circus was kicking off again when it only had just happened. I was overtrained, and well, now here I am, fresh, full of energy, full of vitality, underweight. I know he's close to 200 pounds, so he has a weight cut. That's what happens. You eat, you get comfortable. All of a sudden, that weigh-in day creeps up, and you've got to weigh in. So it couldn't have went smoother for me, and I'm very happy with it. I brought out a full team of people to help me from home and from abroad.
Because you could play out your contract, headline pay-per-views, and then not be beholden to a champions clause.
Man, I don't know. That's.
Conor, you were talking about overtraining last time, and you mentioned the other day on Instagram that you already did like more than 410 rounds. How do you pace yourself on those rounds to not really overtrain this time?
Again, like I said, it was like 3 days on, 1 day off, 3 weeks active, or 3 weeks on, 1 week active rest. So I had 3 days intense work, and then I had that day 4 was an active rest day where I chill and I stretch and I focus on my balance and just keep my body correct.
Notice what he said. So in other words, the monthly cycle was that it was a 3 day on, 1 day off, and if his heart rate was kind of low coming into the off day, then they would kind of wait on that. But notice that he said that the 4th week is an off week. In other words, that's a week of active rest, It's a week maybe to do, 1 or 2 skill session trainings during that week, a lot of solo training, but just kind of getting your mind and your body away from martial arts, or at least away from the 3 days on, 1 day off, high intensity, low volume training.
And then back in for another 3-day push. So that really helped me. I could see the rest ahead of me. So I would push for those 3 days. I would push hard, and then I had my day rest. And with the amount of stuff that comes on, I had that. I would almost push stuff to that day. Okay, I'm gonna handle this on this day. If there was business issues or whatever, it would be on my active rest day. So.
Now keep in mind that 3 week on, 1 week active rest is a great training, monthly perpetual training cycle if you're not in a camp, okay? As you go into a camp, those cycles are going to change. You might wind up doing 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off at certain weeks within a camp. So it changes depending upon how many camps you've done previously, what's your shape level, what's your skill level. All those factors have to be looked at if you're going to do this right. But just as a perpetual, for most competitors on the amateur and even on the pro level, when they're not in camp, that 3 week on, 1 week off cycle works really, really well.
It couldn't have been perfect. 3 solid hard days, 1 day rest, and carry on. Again, I was monitoring my heart rate. If my heart rate was up in the mornings, maybe the rest day would come earlier or later, depending if I woke up on that active rest day.
Notice that he talked about, his heart rate, monitoring his heart rate. So that was another indicator, something that was structured that he was keeping his eye on. And if he noticed that his heart rate was really low one morning when he woke up, that he would bring the rest day on a little bit earlier, knowing that, when you wake up, sometimes, your heart rate's in different places.
And my heart rate was low, I would go again and take the rest day the following day. So it has been very methodical in our approach, and like I said, I've responded amazingly to it. I am full of energy, I am fresh, I am underweight, so I'm happy.
I hope you like this commentary video. If you like this kind of video, please let me know. You can find Your MMA Coach on the web, and you can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Please share this video. Talk to you soon. This is Dion Riccardo with Your MMA Coach.